The following production is part of the Play Some Video Games podcast network.
This week's episode of the PSVG Prime podcast is brought to you by our amazing Patreon supporters over at patreon.com/PSVG. Thank you to all of our Patreon supporters, but especially Coach Hulk, Edwin Callow, Dev Tyus, Kevin A., Chris M., Kyle Heyman, The Bonesaw, Barry Cathcart, Paul Calico. Thank you guys so much for your support. As always, we appreciate you listening and supporting us with those hard-earned dollar bills, y'all. As a reminder, every month we give away a sweet prize from our treasure trove of gifts there that are up for grabs, which still includes the black PSVG polo for anyone interested. So if you're not a Patreon supporter, it's not too late to get in on the action. That'll get you the monthly giveaway. It'll get you episodes of PSVG DLC. Newest one just drops. And I'm going to tease something else. If you listen to PSVG DLC 4, there's another thing coming to you, Patreon supporters. So make sure to check that out. I'm not going to spoil it now in case you didn't hear. But anyway, check it out. Patreon.com/PSVG. But on with this week's episode of PSVG Prime. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of PSVG Prime, the flagship show of the Play Some Video Games podcast network. It is I, your host, Kevin, as always, and with me in the co-pilot chair is my co-host, Mr. Lucas Rose. How are you tonight, sir?
I'm doing well, thank you. I'm trying to be on my best behavior because we're not alone.
We're not alone?
No, there are people out there.
Oh, I thought we were going to start singing the Michael Jackson song, You Are Not Alone, I Am Here For You.
No, I don't know that one.
When he was married to Lisa Marie Presley, he sang the song to her. She was in the video.
Oh, is that the one with Billie Jean in it?
No. See, this is why we can't have people with us, Lucas. You embarrass me. But this episode is not going to be your typical episode. We have the honor of a very special guest tonight. Truly a legend in digital media entertainment, a pioneer, if you will, in a Mr. David Fox. Hi, David. Thank you so much for joining us this evening tonight for some hopefully great conversation, if Lucas and I don't screw this up, about yourself, your projects, and the gaming industry as a whole. So to start things off, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how our listeners might know of you and your work?
Well, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be invited. I guess most people would know me from my work in games, and I was at Lucasfilm Games, which became LucasArts. Right at the very beginning, I was the third person hired inside the games group back in 1982. And I was there for about I was at Lucasfilm for 10 years. I was at Lucasfilm Games, LucasArts for about 8 years. And then 2 more years on a location-based entertainment project that never made it to the public. And kind of been doing games mostly since then, off and on, different forms. I kind of re-entered the gaming market when the iPad came out and wanted to learn how to work with that and create stuff for that. And did a game based on Rube Goldberg's cartoons. Rube Goldberg, who's famous cartoonist known for his Chain Reaction Machine cartoons. And then got to rejoin my old friends from LucasArts, Ron Gilbert and Gary Winnick, when they did their Thimbleweed Park, and got to jump on as one of the programmers and helped with a lot of fun to get back to. And that's probably one of those things is probably where I'm known.
All right. Awesome. Yeah. The Thimbleweed Park, we're going to talk about that later for sure. And, but let's talk about the golden days, if you will, the golden age of video games. So you mentioned LucasArts and Lucasfilm Games. What made you initially decide to go down the route of game designing back in the late 70s, early 80s, when you kind of first began your career?
Well, going back to the mid 70s, I was actually had a bachelor's degree first I started off in engineering at UCLA and thought that I wanted to do something with with computers or with engineering or something, and I just hated it. Not that I hated when computers at that point were just a real pain to work with. You had either punch cards or paper tape. They weren't interactive in any way. And I just found it excruciating to get them to do what I wanted to do. So that was part of it. The other part was I realized I wasn't really an engineer at heart, and kind of did a pivot to humanistic psychology and new age stuff, and ended up switching to University of California at Sonoma, which had a humanistic psychology program, which I joined. And that was my new direction for a while. And I actually graduated, ended up doing some training outside, and had a small private practice for a couple of years, and realized that while I was helping people, I felt like I was going at a really slow pace. Like I really couldn't reach enough people at once, and wondered whether there might be a way to use entertainment like games to reach a much broader audience. Even if it wasn't as pure, you might be able to at least expose people to some interesting ideas and learn things about them. And so the thing I was thinking about was some sort of a interactive amusement park, like interactive Disneyland, where instead of just going into the park and going on the same ride, Pirates of the Caribbean ride, over and over again, that you would actually be interacting, and it would be more like an adventure. And I knew about adventure games. I mean, well, actually I didn't then. So this is before I even did that. So I started picturing that, realized I didn't know anything enough about computers to even start. So my wife and I opened a public access microcomputer center in 1977. And it was a nonprofit, and we ended up starting with 10 computers and ended up with about 40. And people would come in and rent time for like $1.50 an hour on our computers. And this is before people had computers at home. It was just at the very dawn of the microcomputer or home computer age. And during that process, I learned a lot more about programming, entered a lot of games from books and magazines that were written in BASIC into our computers. So we had content that people could play. We reviewed games for creative computing. So we got a bunch of games donated to us so we could review them. I got to learn about what I liked and didn't like about games that were already out there. Played some early text adventure games from, say, Scott Adams' Adventure International. Ended up doing conversions for him from the Radio Shack platform that he used initially to Apple II. And we had to create like extensions to AppleSoft Basic so that it could do if then else, for example, which it couldn't before. So we did all these little tweaks so we could make the conversion of his games easier. And in the process, I learned about debugging games when I saw things that weren't working right, and best practices. Did a game for Children's Television Workshop, Sesame Street people, for a Sesame Place theme park they were opening, I guess in the late 70s. And it's called Mix and Match Muppets. I think it ended up on like a disc with a few other games that they sold. So that was my first official title that was original and that was sold. And then wrote a book on computer animation called Computer Animation Primer. And that was what got me connected to the people at Lucasfilm, because as part of the book, I wanted to show what was being done for the state of the art. What were the movie companies doing? And I got to go visit the newly created computer division, got to hang out with them, ask them questions. One of their co-founders, Albie Ray Smith, offered to read my book after it was completed for technical accuracy. They gave me a whole bunch of great pictures of some of the work they were doing, like on Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan. And Lauren Carpenter, who I met, who had just started working there, had done this cool fractal-based fly-through mountains. And he gave me the film for that, and we plopped that down in the corners of the book so you could use the whole book as a flip book and watch this movie. And so I got to know these people, and I finished the book about a year later. And just right at that time, I heard that this new group was starting called Lucasfilm. Well, they didn't have a name for it. It was the Games Group. And it was a project within the computer division. And of course, I'd already met a bunch of people there. So I quickly called up the head of the computer division, Ed Catmull, and said, I'd love to interview for a position there. And he said, oh yeah, okay, well, we just hired Peter Langston to run this group, but he hasn't really started yet. He'll be here in about 3 weeks. I'll let him know. So I interviewed with him, showed him my manuscript for Computer Animation Primer, which also featured a lot of programs written for the Atari 800, which was, had some really cool animation features. And coincidentally, Atari was the company that gave Lucasfilm like $1 million to help start this new group. Mm-hmm. So we knew we were going to be doing games for the Atari. So all these little things, kind of when I wind it backwards and say, how the hell did I know to, first of all, do a book on computer animation, stay in Marin County, which is where Lucasfilm was located, same place where I live, make connection with the computer vision, do a book on the Atari, and then just have this connection. Everything just kind of fell into place. Like if this were a movie script, I'd say it was contrived. I wouldn't believe it.
No, it's true. I mean, you seem to be like, you started doing something, like you said, the computers back then weren't doing what you want them to do. So you waited it out a little bit almost till it was more achievable and just kind of dug in and did that.
Yeah.
For myself, it's the same thing. So, I mean, obviously I wasn't doing stuff on computers in the 70s. It was more late 80s, early 90s for me. But, in school, they teach you the early floppy disk programming. You had the little triangle and you program it to go up and around and make like a little asteroids-esque kind of game where you shoot the blocks. So I learned how to program stuff like that. But for me, it was like, always wanted to do more. So I stepped away from that for a long period of time myself, went back to it like late 90s when I went to college for it. But yeah, it's a unique story you have here where you almost fell into it. Like you went for engineering, then ended up in psychology, and then just ended up in this world, which was the building blocks of gaming, essentially. Like you were there watching it grow, which is just amazing. So to be in LucasArts at the time, I mean, Third Man Hired, that's crazy in itself. So what was that like? Like, did you know at that time, like, hey, this is going to be something big, or was this just, I want to do this and see where it goes?
Well, I really wanted to still do the Disneyland stuff, location-based entertainment stuff. So, yeah. The first thing I told Peter when I first started working there is, this is my dream. And he said, "Wow, that sounds really cool, but we're going to do home games right now. So maybe in the future sometime." And I said, "Okay, let's do it." And I ended up, we didn't have our space wasn't ready yet, so I ended up sharing an office with Lauren Carpenter, a Fractal guy, and asked him about whether we could do real-time fractals on an Atari 800. And he laughed and said he didn't think it was possible. And he started thinking about it and said, I actually think there might be a way to do it. So that was the origination of Rescue on Fractalus, which I got to create, with huge help from Lauren and Charlie Kellner, who did all the heavy lifting with, the complicated code stuff I didn't know how to do. But I did the design and the story and kind of the wraparound stuff. But I knew that that was probably the most immersive in terms of the games I had done back then. After that, pretty much all the games I worked on were more like graphic adventures. Mm-hmm. And, the whole story part, which is the other part, which I really wanted, was I wanted a way to get someone into a story, but also immersively involved in it when the technology got there. So that was really great. I mean, when Peter left, when Steve Arnold came, general manager, when we kind of pivoted from being more of a R&D group into more production. And when I joined, I think your question going back a bit, did I know what I'd gotten into? Well, I knew what Lucasfilm was, and I didn't know if I had any plans of where this was going to be, if we were going to be a huge game company. I was just excited to be inside of this company because I wanted to get as close as I could to the origin of Star Wars. I just wanted to be inside the Star Wars movie. This was as close as I get. And really disappointed when I was starting to work on Rescue on Fractalus, when I found out that we weren't allowed to do Star Wars games. And so because that was my original thought, this would be a Star Wars game on a planet. And changed it. And the reason we weren't was because all the licenses for Star Wars had already been committed to other companies like Atari for Coin Op and Parker Brothers. And so it's okay. we're not going to do Star Wars. So when Steve Arnold came on and we were doing much more of a production group, that was okay with me. We just, just went into a different direction. I think the next game I got to work on was Labyrinth, based on the movie. I think they wanted to test us with a movie that didn't, it wasn't as close to their family jewels as Star Wars was. If we totally mess it up. And then later on, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, which is another movie license I got to work on. And then after that, around the time I left, I was leaving, it was when we started doing some Star Wars stuff. And then during the 90s, it became more and more, and that became pretty much it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you brought up Labyrinth and Indiana Jones, because you worked on those games in the 80s, and those are some great properties. Actually, I have a Labyrinth poster behind me. I read that the Labyrinth game actually did better in the US than the movie did, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, I don't know if it did better financially or if it was just better received. Maybe it was. And the movie wasn't a huge critical success, or at least not a huge popular success, until years later when it became kind of a cult favorite.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe because the movie didn't do terrifically, Activision, who was the distributor and publisher of the game, this is before we start publishing our own titles, maybe didn't put much into it, because they say, hey, this is not going to be a hit. Why should we put a lot of money into marketing?
Right.
So I don't know how well the game did in terms of sales because of that. It's probably one of the more obscure titles that we worked on. And it was also difficult. I mean, we did not have, Scum, which is what came right after that, the script creation utility for Maniac Mansion. So everything was hand coded in assembly, and just made it much more difficult.
Wow. Well, speaking of franchises or IPs, is there one that you would like to see made into a game that has not been? Like, what would be your perfect game made out of an existing franchise, old or new, that you think would make a good point and click adventure game?
Ooh, well, I think they've all been done in some way or another. Not that I got to do them. I'm a huge fan. I'm still like Star Wars. I was a huge Harry Potter fan. And tonight, when I get off of this, I'm going to watch Game of Thrones. I'm a huge Game of Thrones fan. That would be a lot darker. I love Lord of the Rings before. Some of those are just so massive, though. I don't know whether you have to just choose a small chapter.
Yeah.
Do a game based on that. The downside of working in an existing franchise is that there's so much baggage. I didn't mind working on indie, because even though this is the third movie we based it on, Last Crusade, there was baggage, but we also got a lot of freedom to do what we wanted to do. We had a meeting with George Lucas and Steven Spielberg before we started working on it. I got to do this with Noah Falstein and Ron Gilbert. The three of us got to co-design and create it together, because we had a really tight schedule because the movie was coming out. And Steven said that we could do what we wanted to. We wanted to follow close to the story, but we could kill Indy if we wanted to. We could go to locations that weren't even in the movie, or storylines that weren't in the movie if we wanted to. And so that gave us a lot of freedom. And there as far as I remember, there really wasn't much checking up on us on them. So maybe they just trusted that we would. Maybe they had their hands full by doing the movie, that we would do a good job. Later with Star Wars, I think that was really different. I heard some, horror stories, just some very difficult experiences that people at LucasArts had in the years before it closed down on some Star Wars projects, because of George's involvement in a way which was maybe not being sensitive to how hard it is to change a game storyline halfway through the story, and maybe too hands-on, particularly with things. It's one thing for him to do that with the movies, director producing those, but when it came to the games, I think it got to be very demoralizing. Also maybe some changing his mind. Now, this is all third party from reading articles. I wasn't there, so personally, but in retrospect, I started thinking that we had dodged a bullet by not being able to do Star Wars in the 80s
Yeah.
that gave us the freedom to create our own IP, to kind of be mostly ignored by George during that whole period, and to come, give us time to create our own style of game, our own sense of humor around games, or the reverence that we were known for a lot of the adventure games that we did. And I don't know if we could have done that if someone as powerful as George looking over our shoulder during development.
Yeah, that's very uncommon, I feel, especially nowadays where video games are so huge. They don't want to give you that control for yourself. I feel like it's just like they got to make sure everything's represented the way that they want it to be, and the creative freedom kind of goes out the window just to make sure that the marketing guys are happy or whatever.
Yeah, we did not have marketing on our backs during the 80s. I don't know how it was after. We didn't have a huge marketing team.
When it comes to point and click adventure games, as a game designer yourself, I'd like to know what, in your opinion, what do you think makes a great point and click adventure game? Like, what's the quintessential piece that you think makes a great point and click adventure game? Because I've played some good ones, but the great ones, I feel almost like it's a sum of its parts. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think part of it is that I'm thinking there are several things. I mean, there's this whole thing with the design process where you sit down and you maybe brainstorm some ideas for a game, and most of the first ones you come up with are not going to be that great. But there's a tendency to, because it's often so uncomfortable to be in that I don't know what we're doing kind of stage, you want to grab onto any of these ideas. And I think part of what worked, say I'm thinking about Thimbleweed Park now since it's pretty fresh in my memory, was coming up with, choosing one of those ideas, and then one of us saying, that idea kind of sucks. It doesn't really work. Can we do something better? Here's why I don't think I like it that much. Can we do something that's more creative or more inventive? We already used something that's a similar puzzle to this one elsewhere. So the space to be honest about what doesn't feel right, and maybe part of it is an intuitive sense that, yes, we're getting closer to it feeling right, and whatever feeling right is, it's not funny enough here. It's, this whole area is too boring. I feel like Ron Gilbert's a master at that. And I feel like, he's been doing way more in games over the past couple of decades than I had been. So it was kind of fun to let him, it was his lead. He was the lead on the design, and just go with what he was saying. And he'd come up with a lot of things like, I think we got to change this here.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I would, sometimes Gary would, but being able to say that without fear of being shot down and letting other people hear. So it was very collaborative in that way. And knowing how much polish you have to put in it, how many layers of polish, and knowing when to, because you could also work on this for years if we wanted to, and keep on making it better and better, at least better in our minds, and maybe not objectively better.
Yeah.
The other is, specifically for graphic adventure games, the idea that there are no dead ends. You're also not doing a lot of make work tasks. Like if one of the tasks is having to clean the dishes to give to someone to eat something, you don't force the player to sit there washing dishes in a very boring task, because if you don't like doing it in real life, you probably aren't going to like doing it in an adventure game.
Right.
So find the shortcuts to make things not boring. Once we knew how hard it was to get around the world in Thimbleweed Park, and we made sure that as soon as you earned it, you could get a map for shortcuts.
I love the map. That was great.
Find ways that make it easier to play. I think it was Ron's idea to have the to-do lists. In the old days, you had to have a piece of paper and keep extensive notes of where you were, what you do next. You realize that maybe the modern game player isn't going to have that kind of patience or have that piece of paper with them if they're doing it on their phone someplace. So we try to make it, keep on reminding you what the tasks are, what you learned, in a way that helped direct the players to stay more on target rather than just wander aimlessly. also the idea of having a puzzle which you're not solving accidentally. The idea of taking three things and combining them together in various ways and across the solution and solving something and not even realizing that what the problem was you were solving. So the best, when it works right, you should know that you have to unlock the door, and you have to know why you have to unlock that door, and what's inside of it, and how you might get the key. And so you're actually planning ahead and planning out the whole process that you have to go through, and you're looking for specific things to get something to happen, rather than having solutions pop up that aren't even ones you were knowing you were trying.
Mm-hmm.
That makes
go ahead. Oh, I was going to say, I found Thimbleweed Park to be very accessible, especially because fairly recently I played The Dig for the other podcast, and that was very, very difficult these days when, we've been treated so easily with easy modes and all that stuff. But I think of spoiler. Should we do spoilers?
I think
Can we do spoilers?
It's a 2-year anniversary. We're good.
Okay. Just wanted to be sure, this day and age, you will be shot over a spoiler. I think of at the end when Ransom gets his end game item, and I had to think, I saw it and I was like, oh, why is he getting the card? And then I realized the interaction with the diner, the person who works, the girl at the diner, I was like, oh yeah, that's right. She hates him. So I knew exactly what to do with that item. I didn't have to for this whole game. And I did use the hint system, but I was so glad that I didn't have to ever check my phone, look up a walkthrough, figure out what I'm supposed to do. I found it very accessible, and it made me feel smart, even though I was using the hint system, that I didn't have to look through at a walkthrough. And I was really appreciative of that.
Well, yeah. Problem with the walkthrough is that it's hard to not get spoiled by reading, because you might be looking for a specific solution where you're stuck, but you end up reading 4 other solutions that you didn't want to know about, and then you can't unsee those.
Yeah.
So I think the brilliance of the hint system is that it's very much like the hint books that we used to do, where you have maybe 4 clues that get more and more specific, and in those we had those are overprinted with red or blue ink or something.
Yeah,
and you
that's
have to use one of those red gels like we have in the game. Actually, there's and you can actually, if you have good self-control, you just only look at the first question of each one, and you could find some of the questions that you're looking for. And the game's even better because we knew where you were in the game, so we knew what things you're more likely to want to try to discover based on what you've done and what you haven't done yet. So we can narrow down some of the questions. I want to learn about something in this location, and then give you subtle pushes in the right direction, so you could actually have your aha moment on your own without giving it all.
I want to say thank you. Thank you for that.
No, that's great. So once you left and parted ways with LucasArts, you started a very interesting and unique project company in Electric Eggplant with your wife, Annie. Can you tell us a little bit about what you both do there, how that came to you? What was the inspiration to wanting to do something it's a really cool thing, and I think more people should know about this. Of course, Thimbleweed Park, Maniac Mansion, but this is something you don't see every day, and I think it's a great experience to have people listen and learn more about.
Well, I was, when I left LucasArts, or actually when I left Lucasfilm, the last project I was working on was a location-based entertainment 2-person simulator system that we had as a joint venture with Hughes Aircraft, which was doing a lot of professional flight simulators. So they do the flight simulators for the military and for Boeing, for professional ones. And we wanted them to create the simulator system, and we would do the design of the games or the interactivity, the adventures that you would go on. And I think we also did the look, the design of how it would be themed. And that was really fun. I mean, in a lot of ways, that was one of the best games I ever got to work on. And it was really unfortunate that most people never got to play it. And that was where that was the closest I had come to doing what I really wanted to do initially, which was the interactive theme park because these were intended for theme park. And so when I left, I wanted to do consulting for location-based entertainment, virtual reality, which is starting to come out, not consumer-oriented, but, there were companies producing the hardware. And I ended up saying, okay, well, let's create our own company. And Annie, at the time, was doing screenplays and doing a lot of game design work. She did a lot of the designs for the early Humongous Entertainment game, and co-designing with Lori Bauman, Arnold, who is our manager, Steve Arnold's wife, and that was Ron Gilbert's company after. Mm-hmm. And so we figured we'd be doing a lot of multimedia stuff, and so over the years we ended up doing some things together. Sometimes we work together on consulting projects. Sometimes we do things independently. So, more recently, we published apps and some of Andy's books that she didn't publish through a regular publisher, and it just kind of been our support. We we don't have any employees. If we have a project that we need other people, we'll hire people on for a specific period and do as we need for. So the name Electric Eggplant was I was looking for something that had the same kind of a feel to Industrial Light and Magic, something that was kind of throwing some words together that kind of didn't quite belong and gave you kind of a whimsical feel. And we like eggplant parmesan, so I think came out of that. We like eggplant as a vegetable, and that just came from.
Cool. So you always seem to, like, looking over your resume and everything Electric Eggplant has done on top of all the stuff you did with LucasArts and leading up to this Electric Eggplant, you kind of always seem to find yourself working involved in the industry, whether it's consulting or, publishing and all this app creation that you're doing. Are people constantly seeking you out because of your expertise in your resume? Or are you constantly just looking for new opportunities to challenge yourself with something new to add to your resume?
It's probably both. It's both. And it's probably more the latter in some ways. I don't like doing things over and over again that I've done before. So I kind of like helping to build something and then move on to something else. So, currently, I've been looking a lot into virtual reality. Finally got myself a setup and been playing the games that are already out. So it's more of a research mode for me at this point, and understanding what works, what doesn't work. Can you do a graphic adventure game in VR? Ooh. And what would it look like? And what are some ideas? I just was a backer on Cyan's Kickstarter project, Firmament, which is intended to be a VR immersive VR adventure type game. But in the style of, I don't know if it's in the style of, but like they did Myst, so they kind of broke new territory back then when video was like 2x2 inch, 1x2 inch square. Yep. Yeah. And this is like, okay, you're in the video finally. But I love their stuff. I'm like stuff that's more character oriented and maybe funny, a lot funnier than maybe their stuff has been. So I don't know. If I go back to the 70s, there's always been this intuitive feeling I'd have about what I want to do next. And I would dive into it, I would do it, and then something would come out of it. So, I could, like I was saying before, that I could look back and say it seems kind of miraculous how I ended up, say, at Lucasfilm Games, but it wasn't random. I mean, it was always following something that felt like a passion, that I have to go in this direction next. And I would go in that direction and do it. And then something would pop up and say, this is it. This is what I was looking for, and do that thing. And then, know when I should make the leap to the next thing or not. And, I might think, okay, I've been doing this for a while. This is starting to feel kind of old. I think I need to make that shift again. Sometimes the shift would come with me making the choice to leave a company or project. And sometimes they would perceive that I was getting bored with it and I get laid off or whatever. But whatever it was always like a pop thing, like that freed me up to investigate the next thing I was looking for. So the lesson there is like, hey, listen to that inner voice, follow your passion.
Yeah.
if you feel like you're stuck, you probably are, and maybe start looking for the next thing you should be doing.
It's pretty admirable to talk to somebody who sets out to do what they want to accomplish. A lot of people, I went to film school, for instance, so I know a lot of people who, they went there, they wanted to make films. They thought, maybe it seemed like an interesting idea, but in the end, a lot of them stayed in my hometown and aren't really doing much. Some are working at McDonald's, that type of thing. And they still talk about like we're in film school. And it's kind of tough because, your brain, your heart is telling you want to go do this thing, but other, things that might be out of your control tend to take you away from what you want to be doing. So it's kind of inspiring to talk to somebody who sets their sights on something and then accomplishes those things. I think that's really cool.
I feel like I have to give my wife a lot of credit for this too, because when you have this feeling like you've been doing something and you got to make a change, and making a change means a loss of income.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's hard to just leave and then say, oh, well, we don't have any money coming in. Too bad. To have her support when I feel like that. And it's worked both ways. I mean, she's been in company doing things for a while and she's okay. I got to move on to something else. And so we've been doing this for each other for, this is our 45th year of being married.
Oh,
in August, it'd be our 45th anniversary. And so we've pretty much from the beginning, we would always be sharing dreams with each other and finding ways to either support directly or indirectly those dreams. So like when I said I need to start doing VR research, that doesn't mean I'm going to stop doing other kind of work that brings some money, but that becomes my main focus, and she's supportive of that, and that's really good. And it usually, we find that having the passion to go in that new direction almost always has been paying off for us if we look back over what the results of those choices.
Passion is a very important thing, I think, in what you do. It's
and a supportive doesn't have to be your wife or husband, but having someone in your life who can support you in following those dreams and helping to make them real in some way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's harder to do. I think it's harder to do it on your own.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, sometimes I think it feels like when you're trying to do something on your own, you have no clue. You have to bounce things off from people to get perspective. And if you're not able to gain perspective, then it just feels like you're kind of sailing along and doing whatever. So I think man, we're learning something here. This is some deep stuff.
I know. It's real deep. This is awesome.
We better get back to video games before we get some angry emails and death threats. I want to take it back to Thimbleweed Park because we were kind of wondering, how do you leave the adventure game scene, at least, basically, and then come all the way back around in 2017, right? 2017, mm-hmm. and say, hey, let's make another point and click adventure game when, Call of Duty is kind of the name of the game these days. How does that come to be?
Well, 2017 is when it came out. So I guess.
That's true.
Right. So really, yeah.
2.5 years earlier. It's Ron and Gary. And, I came in, they did the heavy lifting of trying to, come in with the ideas, taking the huge risk of doing a Kickstarter, which I don't think I'd have the guts to do. You're publicly asking people for money, and if they don't like your idea, they're not going to give it to you, and you fall flat in your face. And
soul crushing.
Knows.
Yeah.
No, I don't think I could do that. I had a little bit of participation in that. They let me look at the Kickstarter pages before they launched it, and I was able to give feedback a few times, but I didn't have any contribution to the original story idea. And there was a point where they knew if they got funded and they went beyond, then they could start bringing in some other people to help make it happen. So I think it was announced that I was going to join the group at the same time Mark Ferrari was going to join. And it was a little scary for me, having not done an adventure game for 25 years and having not worked with these guys for that long. I don't know if they were little nervous about that, but not only were we going to do that, it was very public. Being a Kickstarter, everyone was going to know the process and what happened. And Ron did a great job in making sure that there were like one or two or three blog posts a week. I mean, then we started doing podcasts, weekly podcasts. So all the choices and decisions were done in public. But after like maybe the first 10 minutes of brainstorming the first time, everything just kind of fell in place and realized, okay, I guess we still have the same humor. We still have the connection. We can still bounce ideas off each other. And it just, it's like 25 years for me, 25 years got erased. And it was just a blast to work. I mean, it was just very different. We used to walk into each other's offices. Here we used Slack all the time.
Yeah.
We were all in different cities. We would do Slack both for topic, for tech stuff, for sharing documents, but also for conversations and for meetings. And it just found different ways to work. But those are the mechanics or the means that, the core was really this.
Mm-hmm.
So if the question is, why an adventure game, that's probably something we all just loved. That's my most comfortable form of game for me to do based on all the games I've done. Those are the most of them are in that way. That's how I think. Even when I did RubeWorks, the Rube Goldberg game, I saw it as a series of really small adventures where you had a story and you had to solve a puzzle to make something happen. Each level was like maybe 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes. But, I was thinking in terms of this being an adventure game where you're given a bunch of hints and clues and objects, interactions with the different objects and characters on the screen, and had to figure out how to put them together. So, it's the same style game that I had been doing.
Mm-hmm. Did it concern you coming back after adventure games have been fairly dormant, or at least out of the general mainstream of gaming? Did it concern you at all, or were you not even thinking about that really?
I don't think I was. I mean, we already had the proof that there were enough people out there who wanted it by back
through the Kickstarter. So yeah, that's true.
We knew there were at least 18,000 people who wanted a copy.
Yeah.
And they paid for it in advance. And, we were hoping that when there would be more. Even 2 years later, I was still seeing people say, how come I didn't know about this game? Where was it? How, what happened? And, it's a little scary that there were a lot of people who, that we had missed so many people during the rollout and during the whole process. But that just, says that there's a lot of interest. It's hard to get everyone to know about it without, multi-million-dollar marketing budgets.
Yeah.
Right,
I guess
that's
kind of what you give up though, sort of with going through a Kickstarter and all that instead of through a publisher. How you would typically release a game with a publisher and everything, and they have the marketing and all that. So,
right.
Yeah. We actually have a listener question, and her name is Caro, or we call her the Nintendame because she loves Nintendo. And she wanted to know what your favorite character in Thimbleweed Park was and why.
Well, I have two favorite characters, Ransom and Dolores. Dolores probably is if I had to answer with one, it would definitely be Dolores. Ransom, just because he was just so different than anything I had to work with before. And when I'm doing the way we kind of split up tasks on the game was partly by region. I ended up doing the wiring of most of the rooms except for the hotel, and which Jen did, and the sewers, which she did, and I did most of the rest of all the rest of their scenes. And Ron did a bunch of the cut scenes and worked with Lauren on a lot of the dialogue, for more like the dialogue puzzles or dialogue trees.
Okay.
But for all the other interactions where you'd have characters in short cutscenes talking to each other, or you'd have the character figuring out, you say Dolores's flashback. that was, I did that myself, except for one cutscene, and that I did pretty much all. And so you have to put your head into the head of the character when you're writing their dialogue. And I had to take my lead from Ron, who came up with a lot of how these people were. So he often would write maybe one cutscene and kind of understand what their point of view was. We also spent time kind of defining these characters and what drove them, what was their driving force. But in a lot of ways, she was closest to myself. Someone who really wanted to work at Lucasfilm or Lucasfilm, who really wanted the job, a young person, didn't have a lot of experience, and just, the glee and the excitement when she finally got the job was, straight from my own experience. I got to write all those scenes, and it was like really easy experience when I got the job.
Yeah.
So I just connected with her in that way, the geekiness and the sweetness, and she's a really sweet character. And then when we heard later on, when we were actually doing voice casting, so we were listening to a bunch of different audio recordings of people who said the lines for these people, and I heard Elise Cates's lines. I said, this is it. I mean, I don't think for any of the other characters that we heard did I have this like strong feeling like this is the voice of the person in my head. It sounds exactly like her. She just got it. And she also knew how to pronounce the word solder. Most of the other actresses who were doing were pronounced SOLDER, like a soldering iron, would pronounce it solder.
Solder, yeah.
And Elise is she does, besides doing voice work, she's also an audio. She does audio mixing and effects. She did a bunch of the sound effects for the game.
Oh, cool.
And she's in the industry. So for her to even do it probably wasn't a huge stretch for her to play the role. So it's a great mix, a great match.
I feel like a lot of her writing and story is very meta, because you were saying like it all came kind of from you when you were writing it, but there's definitely a lot of jokes that seemed like, how she always defends wanting to be a game designer and stuff like that, and a lot of the nerd jokes and everything. So really appreciated that. I feel like Ransom, is a crowd pleaser just because to me, he's like the voice in my brain that I don't let anyone hear, because if I said what he says, then everyone would just think I was a bleep hole. So
he was way harder for me to do. And I had to really listen to Ron and follow Ron's example with him, and until I found his voice. And I think people know that when we wrote the dialogue for him, we didn't specifically have words in our minds. Well, maybe for some we did, but like, we did a lot of beepings and in the text, we didn't actually have a word there, and then we beep it out. We would just say beep whenever there was a bad word.
Whenever.
And I think people probably know the story that when we had the actor do the lines, he was actually at first reading the lines with beeps in them, and it just was really flat. So Ron had him ad-lib replacement word, for each one, and it just came out way funnier. And I took those recordings, and I was actually the one who beeped them in Audacity, and it was like, I think we counted like 670 something like that lines.
Holy cow!
Those are the number of lines, and then the number of beeps. There often were lines that had 2 or 3 or 4
right in the same line.
Yeah.
That was, I couldn't do more than about my 50 or 60 a day. So it took me a few weeks to do it, because I just was getting like burned out from the repetition.
Yeah.
But listening to his lines is great. So we actually eventually released a DOC through Steam for the uncensored version, which I don't think we ever planned to do, but we had those recordings, so we had to go back and clean them up, put them in as an option if people bought the DOC. It was like, you could hear Ransom uncensored. And I don't know, some people liked him better censored. It was really funny to hear him. It was a little more charming to hear the beeped version, I think.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was fun. So writing him, when I did get into the mode, especially during his flashback where I wrote a lot of the stuff, I had to be someone who very different than myself to write.
Right. Against your nature.
opposite of Dolores in terms of something that was very comfortable, something that was very uncomfortable, but I actually felt very liberated, being able to write like that and push it. And Ron, when we were brainstorming, initially I remember Ron saying that you're really supposed to hate this guy. If you aren't hating him, then we're not doing it right. So unfortunately, he came out a lot funnier, so it was harder to hate him.
Absolutely.
But that first scene where his flashback, he was pretty. That was pretty. I didn't write that. That was, I think Ron and Lauren wrote things, and he's pretty out there.
I actually avoided one of the options just because of what it said, and I was like, oh man, I don't want to do that. That's awful. One of the people to make fun of. I'm like, I don't want to do that.
The kid in the wheelchair.
Yep.
You knew right away.
Yep, I knew.
Oh, the charm of that game is just really something that makes it stand out. So like the point and click adventure game was dormant for so long. Thimbleweed comes by, people gravitated towards the Kickstarter. That worked out well. But like once you actually get your hands on this game and play it, it's like it is the epitome of what point and click adventure games should be. Like in the modern age, it was still had the retro feel, but fully voice acted, which was amazing. It was still funny as all get out. Like it was just such a great experience, and more people, like you said, should know about this game and should have played it. When it launched on the Switch, I played it for the first time then, but I knew about it prior to that. I'm just not a big PC gamer, so I waited. I was like, oh, on Switch it's perfect, it's portable, and I played it, and it was one of my games of the year that year, hands down by far. It was just so much fun. The writing was smart, such a great experience. And like, I hope to see more things kind of inspired by Thimbleweed to want to carry that torch and keep going, with these types of experiences.
And I think, this a good example. I don't know if this is always the case, but the fact that we all had a blast creating the game, I think shows.
Yes.
And we all wanted to put, really make it polished and make it work really well. Everyone on the team was just really dedicated. I think we probably got a little carried away with the in-jokes. And when we were doing the game, it was in our minds, it was for the backers and the people who backed it because they wanted they knew they liked our old game. And so we didn't, any in-joke we could squeeze in there was fair game to put it in. And we looked for opportunities to put as many in as we could. But after the game got released to the general public, some of the reviews that we saw were people complaining about there were so many in-jokes that was taking them out of the story.
Man.
Oh.
So kind of as a solution to that, but also maybe thumbing nose a little bit, we added an option to turn on or turn off the in-jokes, at least some of them, and had them off by default. So the first release, everyone got them. And then a couple weeks later, we had gone through and cut out maybe half. I think it was about half. And that was the default would be that you'd have to turn them on. So people played through the game without even knowing that the option was there. The annoying in-jokes option.
That I saw the option, but I didn't know what it meant. So it was just that and the toilet paper one. So I was just like, well, they're off by default. So I will just have a regular playthrough, I guess. But yeah, I didn't know it was.
You have to go through again with them on then.
I got, I would love to. I will gladly do so.
I mean, they're for people who know the old games. So, I mean, there should have been an explanation. If you like the old Lucasfilm games from the 80s and early 90s, then this one should go on. And if you never play them, then maybe turn them off until you understand, until you have played them.
That would have been much more clear to me.
Yeah. Too much text.
Probably. Yeah. This isn't a text adventure; it's a graphical adventure.
Yes, we're beyond those things now. So to bring it to kind of a different twist here, and you talked about the love and the passion you had, and the whole team did in working in Thimbleweed, and you in our conversation earlier where you said, hey, if you're not getting something out of something, follow that passion, follow that dream, move on to something else. So along the same lines, we see a lot of media coverage right now in gaming around crunches, people working long hours, weeks at a time to meet deadlines. What's your professional thought on it? Is it really a mass problem, or is it, I don't want to say a side effect, but does it come with the job when you work in this type of medium? Like, is that expectation there because it's a labor of love?
Yeah, it's a tough question. If you budget a game with the assumption that you need months of crunch time, then I think you're really ripping off your employees. And that's really bad planning. most of the games I've done have some element of a crunch near the end. The best, if they're better planned, maybe there wasn't a release date that we had to hit towards, so you didn't have the crunch. For most of us on Thimbleweed Park, there really wasn't what I would call a crunch period, but there were times where I'd be putting a lot more time towards the end because we had a deadline. Then you put more in to get it, but it was never at least for me, it was never an exhausting, drag myself across the finish line kind of thing. I think Ron probably put in way more time than a bunch of us, so I can't speak for him and whether it was stretched too thin. I mostly had weekends opened. I mostly worked normal hours, although my hours might have been shifted. I like to work late anyway, so but I never felt like I was crunching. At Lucas, I remember a couple of times near the end of a game when we were trying to hit a target, I might have spent maybe 2 or 3 nights where I slept overnight. That was when we were at the ranch. I had a couch in my office. I figured, okay, I really want to save the round trip back and forth. It's too late to drive home right now. It'd be safe because the roads to Skywalker Ranch were pitch black and windy. Yeah. But it wasn't crunch in the same way. And back then, I think coming from a movie company where there seemed to be an expectation that you'd be putting in 50 hours a week as the standard. When people worked on a movie, there was essentially a crunch period where you'd be putting a lot more time. But I think most of them they were probably getting paid for it. I don't think they were doing it for free. So it wasn't like you're a salaried employee and you're putting in overtime and everything without getting paid for it. So I think where it gets really destructive is when the culture expects it and you're not getting compensated for it. And you're doing it out of fear. Like if you don't do the crunch, then you're going to be kicked out or you're going to get a bad review, that you're not a team player. All that I think is pretty unhealthy. And if you're doing it because you really want to put it in because you're so passionate, then I think then it's more of a personal call. If it really is a choice, then that's one thing. If you're being compelled to out of fear for your job or reputation or whatever, then that's not cool.
Agreed.
If that makes sense.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Definitely not a sustainable way to continue to make video games, at least for a person. I could see easily getting burned out of that. As we wrap up, I do have to ask, or we have to ask, I know you talked a little bit about getting into VR. Are you playing any games right now? And if so, what are they? Or what are your all-time favorites if you don't have anything that you're playing right now?
Well, I have this, when I got my equipment, I got this huge collection of games and I've barely made a dent. The one that I got into that I like to finish. Let me clear my throat a second.
Sure.
I'm gonna turn it on. Okay. The one VR game which I'm really enjoying is Moss.
Oh, great.
And it really is a graphic adventure in a sense. It's gorgeous. They did some really brilliant things with the bringing you into the world as a magical creature, basically, that controls this character. And in a lot of ways, there's a lot of feeling of adventure type game. A couple of things I don't care for about it are the control mechanisms. I'm not a platform game player. I don't have great reflexes, and I would much rather be able to move the character by pointing and clicking and having it find its way to that place rather than having to time jumps and steering it so it doesn't fall off of a ledge or something.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be great if there were a mode for us uncoordinated people to play the game. The charm of the game is really the discovery, and it's kind of giving me a barrier to that discovery. So I'd like a way to be able to play it without having to become skilled at something, which I don't care that much about becoming skilled at. It becomes frustrating because I know what I want to do, but I can't physically get this thing to do what I want it to. Then it takes me out of the game, and it becomes a barrier. So how do you do that without creating that frustration? Well, making it point and click would be one way. You just say, go here, and just trust that the character can figure out how to jump up on the wall itself without you telling it when to do it.
Yeah.
And the fun part is figuring out how to help it by moving away barriers or creating bridges or things like that to help the character. But overall, it's a really fun game. So, other ones have I started? I mean, the other, when I've been showing my friends and family who have never used VR before, the first thing I would probably show them is the Coco VR experience, which was I think created by under the auspices of Pixar that did Coco. And I don't know if they used a lot of the same assets, but it's just a really, especially if you've seen the movie, it's a really engaging short experience. I mean, it's not a game, it's really more of an exploration.
Yeah.
But it's gorgeous. And they did a really good job of creating, making you feel like you enter this world in a, just beautiful colors and sounds. I have a whole bunch of other ones I play, so you have to check back with me in a month.
Don't play any of the scary ones. I've tried some of them and they're horrible.
I purposely didn't buy any of the scary ones. And I try to avoid the ones that said this one may make you feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
In other words, motion sick.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I'm not the worst in terms of being sensitive, but I'm probably below average. I can get motion sick playing a first person shooter on a flat screen. So,
yeah.
So I that's not my area.
That's fair. Lucas and I are very familiar with being below average, so we're with you there.
That's true.
So
I just want to say one more thing.
Absolutely.
So the other area though is location based VR, and there I've also been going to as many of those centers around to see what they've been doing for like a 10-minute immersive experience where you free roaming or roaming with that, mostly free roaming where you have a backpack computer on.
Yeah.
Like the Void, Dreamscape, Nomadic are three that I thought, and that might be more the future for it in terms of being able to do like an escape room or adventure game where you can move through a physical environment and pick up objects and make things.
That's a really good idea. So this as we final question here now. So, thank you for all the time you spent with us. It's been fantastic. And
yes.
I think I kind of know where this answer is going to go, because you've talked a lot about VR and you're experimenting with VR here. What's next for David Fox?
I would love to work immersive. Hey, it's location-based entertainment, immersive VR types. It could be AR, something where could be theme park based, or at least out of the home entertainment where we don't have limits to the kind of hardware we're using, and we don't have to worry about, is their computer going to be powerful enough to be able to render this properly and all that. We're controlling all aspects. I got to do work with Annie, my wife, on a overlay game for Disney at Tokyo Disney Sea theme park, and that was a blast. I mean, that was kind of one of my dreams, was to do something at a theme park and actually create something that people could use. And we did this like 11 years ago. And we happened to go back to Japan a year ago and I got to try it, and it's still there, and it works. And it was really fun. And it's, it's basically a map treasure hunt type thing as an overlay for a really cool location called the Fortress, which looks like something right out of the game Myst, almost Escher-like, and just really very cool. You can look it up. But I'd love to do something like that, but with the tech, so AR or a VR experience. And unfortunately, that's not likely something I can originate. So maybe one of your people who's listening to this podcast will say, "Hey, I know this project that he should work on. Let's call him up."
I feel like it would be almost traveling in the footsteps of video games themselves, when everyone used to go to an arcade to play the latest and greatest technology. It could be that VR would travel in those same footsteps and do the same thing. Like you said, make it more accessible, make it, put it out there so people can see what it can do, get the technology up to where it needs to be to bring it home. And like you said, you'd be in control of the experience. So it would be the best VR experience that you could get. And I think that sounds wonderful personally. I want to go there. I want to go do that right now.
Well, there are places you can do that. But not ones that I worked on, but ones that are worth checking out. And in some ways it's like when we did the computer center, there's this interim period from the time that the technology became available to the time when it was either not so clunky that you had to deal with awkwardnesses with it or expensive or all these other things. And VR is still kind of in that awkward stage.
Yep.
And most people probably shouldn't buy it yet because it's going to go through a lot of transformations. But the place to check it out would be at a VR arcade or Dave and Buster's type place where they have VR stuff, or at a standalone place, and just have the experience because it's for those who haven't tried it yet. And there's a really great experience that, don't do the zombie one. Do one that matches the kind of game you like to play anyway. And they're theirs.
My wife would agree with the don't buy the VR thing because when I told her it was coming out and then we found out how much it was for the Oculus Rift, she was like, I hate you, but I can't say no to something that you're dreaming about. So go ahead. But yes, it was definitely, like you said, headaches and it's just not there yet, unfortunately.
Yeah. And it'll happen. I mean, I don't think it's going to be more than a couple of years before the tech is going to get cheap enough and powerful, maybe 3 or 4 at the most. And there's all these little pieces that are becoming standard, like eye tracking, maybe, checking your facial expressions and plastering them onto your avatar and a bunch of things, which I think you really need for it to be effective. 3D sound, some of them have that, some don't. And untethered and, ideally where you don't have to have a really powerful PC to do it.
Right.
So, that's all going to happen. So in the meantime, just don't frustrate unless you're doing it for me. So I can justify because I can write it off.
Yes, right.
I'm researching it. Unless you could justify that, then don't, just wait. And or find one that you think is worth it based on your costs and what you have. I mean, the PlayStation one is actually pretty.
Yeah. I feel like that's the middle ground is the PlayStation VR kind of.
Yeah. And there's new ones coming out now too. So
yeah. Yep.
All right. So where can people connect and find out all about David Fox online?
Well, I'm probably most active on social media on Twitter, and it's David B as in Bruce Fox and at David B Fox, and my website, electriceggplant.com. I don't hang out there, but you can at least see what we've been up to. I'm on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. But I think Twitter is probably where I'm way more active, like by 10 times as much as the other one. Instagram, I'm on there too. But, again, if people try to reach me through those, I might miss it. I usually don't miss it on Twitter. But I do have a contact form on Electric Eggplant.
All right. Well, thank you again so much for spending the time. It was a honor and a pleasure.
One more thing I should say.
Absolutely.
I'm going to be in Warsaw for Pixel Heaven Fest, which is on the 18th and 19th of May. I get to give a talk there. And then I'm going to be at DevCon in Cologne, Germany in August with Noah. And we're both going to be giving a talk on Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
Nice.
30th anniversary of that game. So if you happen to be in those countries, then that's where you can find us.
All right. So listeners, go find them, seek it out, seek out the knowledge, seek out the inspiration, check out the works of David Fox, electriceggplant.com. Thanks again, David, for your time. And as always, listeners, we ask that you never stop gaming.